Hello, my name is Kathryn, and this is my presentation for this year's annual symposium held by the Guelph Classics Society. This year, my presentation is focusing on the parallels between the modern hero, Captain America, and the ancient hero of Achilles. My paper is focusing on their similarities and differences through a comparative analysis of their two stories and their characters represented through the war. The story of Achilles is well known today in Homer's Iliad. He describes a war between the Greeks and Trojans, where the heroes come together and fight for a united cause, and this is much like the Avengers of today. Captain America was a soldier in World War II, and he joined the army to fight against Nazi Germany, and which was currently being run by Hydra, and they were led by Red Skull at the time. This presentation is going to argue that both Achilles and Captain America are comparable through their role in the war, their superhuman abilities, and their impact to society. Through the influence of superheroes, this presentation will also analyze the importance of storytelling and the ways in which storytelling has changed and remains similar today. So again, the main points and arguments of this paper are going to be focusing on the two characters as fierce warriors, the significance and imagery related to their shields, the reflection of society through these characters, and the impact of heroes in storytelling on society. I think it's important to mention here as well that the two heroes also have a connection through their superhuman abilities. Achilles has his armor, but in other later renditions of the story, he was dunked into the river Styx by his mother Thetis, and this made him invulnerable and almost immortal. Although this is a later telling of the story, it also connects to the story of Captain America, because Captain America gained his abilities through a serum that was given to him at the start of his journey in the war, after he was selected from a few different soldiers. And that serum gave him his strength and his invulnerability, and this is just one other connection that can be made. The reason I don't go too much into this in my actual paper is because it is the later story of the telling of Achilles and his journey, and it doesn't focus on Homer's Iliad, and I would like to focus on the ancient source and the original story. The first point that we're going to be focusing on is the role of Achilles and Captain America as the perfect soldier and warrior in their society, and the importance of their warrior status in the war. An important parallel of the two of these characters being warriors and soldiers in their society is that they both are going to have eternal glory from their sacrifice. Both Achilles and Captain America end up dying in the war and dying to save others in battle. They're both willing to die for others, and that's going to bring them a lot of glory and fame later on. Now, Achilles is seeking this eternal glory, whereas Steve Rogers, or Captain America, he wants to end the war and he's willing to do whatever it takes. So this is one way in which they're different, is their overall motives. Achilles knows that he's going to die in war, and he chooses this life over a long, prosperous one, because he wants to be famous and he wants to have this eternal glory attached to his name and his legacy. But it was seen as a very important thing for a warrior to die in battle. It was one of the highest regards in Greek culture, especially for warriors and soldiers. And so Achilles embodies that in his character and in his sacrifice during the war. And although their motivations may be different, they're both seen as heroes because of their sacrifice and willingness to die on behalf of others. So here I have a few examples as to how Achilles and Captain America both show their skills as warriors. So Achilles, in the 10th year of the Trojan War, when he stops fighting, the Greeks severely lose the progress that they had made. They're pushed back to their ships, and it's not until Achilles rejoins the war that they're able to push back the Trojans back to their walls and advance further against their army. As well, up here I have the quote from Homer's Iliad about the prophecy of Achilles' death and how he chooses this life of glory over the long, prosperous life that he could have led. As well, Captain America, he shows a lot of willingness to die for his country. One of his main character traits is his care for others, and he really embodies this trait that a lot of people in American society want to embody. He shows his bravery, and in training, he throws himself onto a grenade, which was a trick by one of the officers, but he didn't know that at the time, and he wanted to save everyone else around him, despite being bullied by some of them. As well, at the end of the first film, in Captain America, the First Avenger, he does crash land a plane into a glacier in order to avoid that plane, which was headed to New York, and it was full of bombs to blow up New York and other American cities. So this concept of being a warrior and being a brave soldier who's willing to do whatever it takes for their country and for their fellow officers is something that's embodied and displayed in history as well. Through Achilles, we see a lot of resemblance to the Spartan society from the 5th century BC. Here I have a quote from Herodotus, which describes Leonidas and his fellow Spartan soldiers, and how they knew that they would die. Nevertheless, they pursued the war and the battle and made sure that they fought until the last one of them was standing, and they never gave up hope. As well, it's said that Captain America, and as a soldier whose willingness to die for his country, perfectly represents the martial consciousness that characterizes the complex American military and industrial system. So we can see that Captain America and Achilles are both representing the culture and the military strength of the two cultures and places which they represent. Achilles has a special connection with Sparta. There was actually a hero cult and shrine erected in honor of Achilles in Spartan culture and Spartan society. And Captain America remained a very important symbol to American citizens, both in the comic world, but also in real life. A lot of people looked up to Captain America as their own superhero and were inspired by him to do what it takes and to be better people. It is also important to look at these two characters and their warrior status and the motives behind them. So Achilles was motivated a lot by his own rage and wrath. In the 10th year, he does stop fighting in the Trojan War, as I mentioned before. It was mainly because he did not believe that Agamemnon was justified in his actions. Agamemnon was king of Mycenae, and he was not the best king. He was angering the god Apollo. He wanted to continue in the war despite it had gone on for 10 years and there wasn't a lot of progress being made. As well, the motive of the war was his brother wanting to get his wife back, who may or may not have actually left willingly. As well, he wasn't respecting his fellow officers and was taking the spoils of the different soldiers, including Achilles himself. Achilles only rejoined the war because he felt justified, and at the death of Patroclus, his dear friend and possibly lover, he realized how much the Greeks were suffering, and he sought revenge for the death and of his dearest companion, and also for the rest of the Greeks. On the other hand, we see that Captain America, Steve Rogers, he doesn't stop fighting, but he does continue. He doesn't ever stop fighting in the war. It's actually the opposite. He's trying really hard to be accepted into the military, and he even lies on his record in order to get into the military because he was too small. And one of the officers had said to him, "I'm saving your life, kid," because he didn't think he would survive the war. But after Steve Rogers becomes Captain America, he is filled with confidence and this new power that makes him unstoppable. At the death of Bucky, who's his closest friend and companion, he confides in his own partner, Peggy Carter, and he's a bit hesitant in continuing because of the loss of Bucky, but he knows that he needs to continue. As well, this need for revenge now drives him, much like Achilles' wrath and Achilles' need for revenge. So although both of them have slightly different motives, and Achilles wants glory, whereas Steve just wants to do what's right, they both end up doing the same thing. They both continue in the war in order to seek vengeance for their loved one, and they both end up being successful even if it costs them their life. So the next point, and one of the most obvious points about the connection between Achilles and Captain America, is their shield. They both rely heavily on their shields, and they're both round and hop-on shields. I've broken this section into two different parts. The first will be focusing on the shield as a symbol of might, and the second half will then look to the symbol of the shield as representing society. So first we're going to take a look at how the shield represents strength, and also how it represents the might and power of these two warriors. So first, we see that Achilles, in his shield, it represents his anger and his strength as a warrior, and it's a warning to those who are fighting him. So his armor and his shield are very recognizable, and when people are fighting him, they know it's Achilles, and they fear him, and they respect him, but they know that if they go and fight him, they may not come out with their lives, and that's very common in the Iliad. It's a very common theme. As well, his armor, because it was created by the gods, it was created by Hephaestus and given to him by his mother, it's has this special power with it and makes him more invulnerable, and it protects him in battle. Part of the reason he was given this armor is because his mother knew this prophecy that he would die in battle, and she wanted to protect him as long as possible. And all of this together, all this story and of his armor, it instills fear in those who see him, and it warns them of his power. As well, his shield is displaying scenes of everyday life. After Patroclus dies, he's given new armor and a new shield, and this shield is depicting Greek culture and imagery, and it also kind of relates back to this prosperous life that Achilles could have had he not decided against going to war. As well, Captain America's shield, he represents the American army and the strength of the forces against Red Skull and Hydra and Nazi Germany. So Captain America's shield doesn't only represent his own strength and his own power as a warrior, but it also represents the entire American army and the entire Ally forces against Germany and the Nazi forces. So here I've included an example of Achilles' wrath and what people may think of when they see his armor and his shield, and what that shield and his strength means. So it represents his wrath and his anger, and that's the best example of this is when he kills Hector, and he pierces both his feet, and he drags him around the walls of Troy 3 times to display his defeat of Hector and kind of parade around in his victory. And he does this to defile his corpse, which is awful in Greek religion, and it kind of ruins this sacred burial rites. And so Achilles does this out of revenge for Patroclus, and he wants to utterly destroy Hector. And so in his wrath, he's irrational, and he does these horrible things, and that's the kind of warrior he is. And his wrath drives him so much and makes him such a fierce warrior that people are afraid to fight him. And so that's what his armor and his shield represents. Captain America, on the other hand, so his shield is painted the colors of the American flag. And he represents America and the American power and American forces. But his shield is also made of vibranium, which is this rare metal only found in Wakanda. And at this time, this is some of the only vibranium found, and so it's highly indestructible, and that also represents the power of America and their forces in the war. The shield, through its imagery and also through its material, shows the indestructibility of the American forces. So next we'll take a look at the power of the shield and how the shields also represent the society of both Achilles and Captain America. So the shields of these two heroes represent the societies from which their stories are prevalent. Spartan society from the 5th century BC, and the hoplite soldiers who used the hop-on shield are represented through the myth of Achilles. This hop-on shield is very important because it was a round shield, and it was made primarily of wood and bronze. So this is likely the similar type of shield that Achilles would have used. And this shape is also mimicked by Captain America in the round shield that he carries. In the movie Captain America, the First Avenger, there is a scene where Steve is talking to Howard Stark. Howard Stark is the creator who made his shield, and they're looking at the different styles of shield that he wants to use. And this round shield was hidden under a few scraps, and Steve sees it, and he knows instantly that's the one he wants. I always take this as kind of like a nod to ancient culture and Spartan society, and this type of round shield that they all used, in its effectiveness in battle, and how now Captain America is using it as well. Captain America's shield itself also represents American people, as I had mentioned previously, through displaying the colors of the American flag. Now it has one star in the center, and I propose that this one star is representing all of the states, and they're united in one hero. So they're all fighting together for one cause, much like how the Greek police united to fight against Troy during the Trojan War. So it's clear to see that Achilles is embodying this Spartan culture and this representation of Sparta as this military culture, which is also likely descended from the Mycenaean culture of this warrior group from mainland Greece. And interestingly, Sparta had their own professional army, and this was something that other Greek city-states didn't have. And in this army, the soldiers were devoted their whole lives to military service, and the majority of their life, that is, until their 60th year of serving the military. And they would train from a very young age, and all of the boys would go to train in this culture in their own military and army. And then the women were left to take care of the house and the estates and everything like that. So Sparta really focused on building these warriors, and Achilles really embodies the perfect warrior that they would have all aspired to be like, which is why Achilles relates so well to Spartan culture and why I keep drawing this connection, because it's important to see that Achilles represents this perfect warrior, and he's strong, and he dies in battle, and he dies for his country and for his beliefs, and that's what every Spartan soldier aspired to be, and that's why it's so important to make that connection. As well with Captain America, he's representing the American society, so he's representing these United States, and his personification of the American identity. It's said that he's more relatable. The American symbol is usually the eagle, but through Captain America, he's more relatable, and the American people have a better ability to relate to him, and he personifies the values that the eagle represents. Therefore, he's a more modern depiction of the American identity. So aside from these characters as warriors and their representation of society through their role in the war and the importance of the army or the warrior to culture, it's also important to analyze their relationships. And one of the main relationships of Achilles is that he has with Patroclus. And this is mirrored in the story of Captain America through the relationship of Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes. So through this power of companionship, Achilles and Captain America are connected again, and we see how the story of Achilles has been adapted into modern stories. So these relationships, they resemble each other significantly, and Achilles' companion, Patroclus, is very similar to James Barnes or Bucky Barnes. So they both end up taking up the arms of their comrades when neither are actually the true hero of the story. So they don't wield the true power to use these weapons, and so they end up dying against their enemies. And both these deaths are extremely significant in the overall development of both Achilles and Captain America, and they're the driving force of their revenge and drive them to seek out vengeance against their enemies. So these companions, these brothers in arms, and these dear friends are extremely important to the development of these two characters in their overall stories. So we see in the Iliad that Patroclus is killed at the hands of Hector, who pursued him because he thought that he was Achilles, since Patroclus was wearing Achilles' armor at the time. And since he wasn't the true hero, the armor didn't protect him in the right way, and he didn't have the strength to wield Achilles' armor. And at learning of the death of Patroclus, Achilles is driven to rejoin the war, and he seeks vengeance for Patroclus, despite the prophecy of his imminent death should he continue in the war. And he doesn't care, and the pain is too great for him, and he must seek out revenge and kill Hector. And this is what really drives him, makes him such a fierce and terrifying warrior in the Iliad. As well, similar to Patroclus, when Bucky takes up the armor, or in this case the shield of Captain America, he dies, and he's not able to wield the strength of this shield. He's not a super soldier like Captain America. And through the same type of relationship, through this extremely intense bond that these two characters have, the deaths of Patroclus and Bucky, they drive these heroes in their grief, in losing like a brother or a best friend, and in some theories, even potentially a lover. They fight even harder to avenge their deaths. And so, as I previously mentioned, this wrath that Achilles feels, it drives him to seek out revenge against Hector. And as I mentioned before, when he slaughters Hector, he goes the extra step and defiles his corpse so that he can't have a proper burial. And this final battle between Hector and Achilles, we see this rage and how much he's driven by his grief for Patroclus. And as well as Steve Rogers, he's devastated at the loss of Bucky, and his anger at his loss drives him, although it doesn't overtake him. And this is where they also differ. Steve isn't driven fully by this rage, and he still wants to do what's right and be honorable. And so he defeats Red Skull, and what lets him have a level head in all of this is he does it for Bucky, but he does it in a way that is still respectful to Bucky's memory. And he doesn't want to let anger and rage take over him. And he still wants to embody the values that American society found so important. It's also important to bring up another aspect of the relationship of Achilles and Patroclus and Captain America and Bucky Barnes. So there are a lot of scholars, and there's much debate about the relationship and the type of relationship that Achilles and Patroclus may have had. And there is historical evidence through different relationships, such as the relationship of Alexander the Great and Hephaestion, that suggests that this relationship between Achilles and Patroclus may have been romantic or may have been sexual. And it may just have been a very intense type of friendship. It's hard to tell what kind of friendship it was, as Homer never really explicitly says whether they were lovers or not. But this idea is still very important to look at. And it also goes to show as well, like through the relationship of Alexander and Hephaestion, the Greeks accepted these types of relationships. And so it is quite possible that this happened. And in modern society, in today's culture, and the story of Captain America, although nothing has been proven, and these are purely fan theories, there are parallels to this relationship of Achilles and Patroclus, that Bucky and Steve may have also been in a relationship with one another. Again, these are fan theories, so they're not rooted in any solid proof. But it's interesting to see how this story of Achilles and Patroclus and this relationship have evolved through the relationship of Steve and Bucky, and how these relationships are still valued and paralleled into modern society, and how they've adapted to reflect the different and changing cultures of the time. So through these stories, through the Iliad and through comics and superhero stories, it's important to also see how mythology and how superhuman abilities have adapted through storytelling, and how storytelling remains important to society today. So now we're going to take a look at the significance of stories and the significance of how they reflect culture and society today. So through storytelling and through different superhero movies and comics, we see a lot of reflection of society, and we see the different values, the different ideologies, and the different beliefs that society has as a whole at the time that they were published and created. And that remains true going into the future and looking at all of the works that have been created whether they're performed or whether they're written down. It's important to see that Homer, he started recording these stories in 800 BC, but they were around long before him, and they were oral tradition, and they'd been adapted to change and reflect the society. And that continues to happen today. The story of Captain America has changed over time, and was constantly being modified in order to reflect the culture and society of the time. And so we see over time how stories have adapted in order to adjust to their audiences, and this is true of all types of stories. And that's how we can tell that there is still so much influence from classical culture and classical stories in the modern world and in our own modern stories. And when we consider all of the characters and all of the plots and storylines, there's always going to be an underlying truth and underlying message or some type of connection to mythology or to antiquity and their culture and society, and how they told stories, and how it's continuously adapted and changed over time. And it's really interesting to see that over 3,000 years, we still find these stories, whether they're rooted in fact or pure fiction, how important they are and how they continue to be created and reflect the people and the changing cultures. Also, when we consider just like American comics, they're also embodying these values of justice and truth and really important ideas to society, just as Greek myth had embodied such important Greek beliefs and reflected the culture of the time. Lastly, it's important to recognize that it's not just Captain America who has these parallels to ancient heroes, and there are other influences of antiquity on modern superheroes, which I'll briefly explore now. Classical culture and classical mythology have a huge influence on not just Captain America, but other heroes as well, and there are multiple characters in comics and movies who have their roots in classical culture. Although it's impossible to list all of them, I think it's important to look at a few and see that it's not just a one-off. So there are countless examples and parallels that exist between modern and ancient stories and superheroes, and many current superheroes draw upon inspiration from these ancient characters and these storylines. Some examples include Iron Man. So Iron Man from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he deeply resembles Hephaestus, the Greek god. They're both inventors and have a very strong connection to technology and technological advancement, especially in weapons. As we know, Iron Man, he started his business with Stark Technologies from his father. He inherited the business, and it was a weapons company until he discovered who the weapons were being sold to, and then he became Iron Man. Additionally, the red and gold of Iron Man's suit could also reflect the fire and the forge of Hephaestus, which is where he would have created his weapons in antiquity. As well, we see Wonder Woman, who's from the DC franchise, and she is rooted in classical culture much more openly, and it's much more obvious of a connection. She's an Amazon warrior, and her backstory calls upon these ancient beliefs of the female warrior society of the Amazons. And so these are only two examples, but again, there are a lot. Many comics do pull inspiration from antiquity and from ancient beginnings and origins, and it represents the relevance of classics in modern society and the relevance of classics to younger generations as well, which I think is really important to look at. So it is therefore clear to see that Captain America, the first Avenger, and Homer's Iliad and the story of Achilles are interconnected with one another, and Captain America's story is really a retelling of Achilles through a modern perspective and through a modern story. And I hope that you all enjoyed this presentation, that you all are able to take something away from it. Not only that these characters are related, but also how much classical antiquity and classical culture have influenced today's society. And so I hope you'll enjoy it. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you at our live Q&A session on Microsoft Teams on March 12th at 10 a.m. until 2 p.m., where you can hear from other presenters. Thanks again, and have a great day.